Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.
Today on Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest, Nancy Deyo, spent much of her life succeeding in high-performance environments. She was a Silicon Valley CEO. She became a Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute Fellow. She understood discipline, ambition, problem-solving, and endurance. Then a medical crisis on Mount Kilimanjaro changed everything. What followed was not a quick recovery story. It was a 15-year journey through misdiagnosis, chronic pain, opioid dependence, identity collapse, and the painful realization that the strategies that had once helped her succeed were no longer enough. This is Stories from Real Life, and today's story is Nancy Deyo's. Mountain high, valley low.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to episode 205 of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining us for the podcast where real stories are so much more interesting than fiction. Today on Stories from Real Life, former Silicon Valley CEO Nancy Deyo shares how a medical crisis on Mount Kilimanjaro led to chronic pain, opioid dependence, identity crisis, and a radically different understanding of strength. Nancy joins us today from New Mexico. So Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Melvin. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So let's start with some helpful advice. So for listeners dealing with chronic pain, what do you want to tell them about resilience that they might be getting all wrong?
Well, the first thing I want to share is that pain, despite what you might think and what you might feel, isn't the enemy. It's information that many of us are really taught to ignore. And I have to say that I learned that the hardest way that I possibly could. And today, I think I define resilience very differently than I did when I was running around catching airplanes and going to meetings in Silicon Valley. At the time, I thought it was about pushing through. I thought it was about working harder, outlasting everybody, bouncing back from any problems. And today I realize it's very different. It's about listening to your body and your mind and figuring out what it can handle and adapting within any limits that you have while still focusing on the possibility.
Okay. So before this medical crisis, how would you have described yourself?
Oh my heavens. I was hard driving, career focused, defined by my role as a Silicon Valley executive, moving too fast, being too rigid, controlling everything, discipline would prevail. And if I did all those things right, I would achieve anything I set my mind to.
Okay. And how do you define yourself now?
I'm much more grounded. I'm calmer. I move more slowly through the world. I observe more. I think I see more. And I cherish the relationships that are in my life instead of the roles that I play. And I listen longer.
So looking back, what did high performance culture teach you that helped you? And what did it teach you that later hurt you?
High performance culture teaches you how to strive. It teaches you how to go after something aggressively in a focused fashion and achieve a goal. High performance culture also teaches us that there's only one correct way, which is not at all true, in my opinion, now in a world filled with individuals, and we're all different and distinct and unique, and there isn't one way forward.
So let's talk about your Mount Kilimanjaro experience. So what drew you there in the first place?
Well, the business that I was running in Silicon Valley, like many startups in those days, was running out of cash. And in a last-ditch effort to save it, I sold it to my arch rival, which was crushing for all of us on the team. It was clearly a failure. It was my first. It was palpable. And I crumbled. I really didn't know who I was. And I thought to myself, one thing that I knew I was an athlete. And I thought, I'm going to use my physical capability and I'm going to redeem myself after this failure. And I'm going to go after one of the highest mountains in the world. It was the highest mountain. It is the highest mountain in Africa at 19,000, I think 341 feet. And that was how I was going to show myself that I could still succeed at something. So my husband and I trained for this mountain. We ran in gyms with heavy packs on our backs and climbed what used to be the Stairmasters and did lots of high altitude hiking and really prepared ourselves physically and mentally for what is not a technical climb, but is just a very aggressive 7 days straight up and 2 days down. I really had no business climbing that mountain because 3 weeks before on a training day, I was on a Stairmaster that was broken and it created no resistance for my stepping. And so I ran at full pace like I always did. And that night I thought to myself, I've really done something to my back. Something's seriously wrong. I had never had any problems in my life with any pain that I couldn't overcome as an athlete or any injury that I couldn't move my way through and past. But I decided to climb the mountain anyway. I decided that I could compartmentalize the pain. I would just go on and go up, and I would muscle my way to the goal by just pushing like I always did. And on the first day, I had to relinquish my pack because I couldn't stand the pressure of the weight on my back. And on the second day, I remember that when we hit camp, I had to immediately lie down. I really was hurting. And on the third day, I could no longer sit for meals. There was just something about the way my spine touched a hard surface that I couldn't tolerate. And on the fourth day, the team fashioned me a back brace out of duct tape and an inflatable pillow. So I had some support for what was bothering me. It just felt like my legs were disconnected from my body. And by the time I hit the next couple days, I knew something was really wrong. And I decided to descend, and I would go down a different way than we came because I wanted to get down quickly, and my husband would go ahead and summit. So that was a core decision that I made at 16,000 feet. That was, in essence, just another failure. It was just another notch on my belt that I really didn't want, but one that I could not push through.
So you're at 16,000 feet, only 3,000 feet from the summit. Did that feel like a failure, or did it feel like a partial success for you?
Oh, it felt like a failure at the time. I mean, I was at 16,000 feet. I had collapsed on the trail after a couple of hours hiking with two porters who unfortunately didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak much Swahili. And they carried me to a tent, and I just passed out. And I remember waking up at midnight, and I literally couldn't move my legs. And I thought, oh my God, something horrible has happened. Maybe I'm paralyzed. Tried to move my body, and it was like somebody had driven a steel rod through my spine. And I had two thoughts. I thought, number one, my father was a physician, and I thought, I'm probably bleeding out. I mean, this might be it. I might end up a name on a plaque like hikers on mountains that don't make it down. And the second thing I thought is the strategy and the habit that I've used all my life, just pushing my way through everything, it's just not working anymore. And I don't know what to do. So something shifted, but you would think I would learn from that moment about what I had used all my life to move forward, but I didn't learn it then. It took me a long time to learn that resilience wasn't about that.
So you didn't know what was going on, and then when you sought medical treatment, the doctors didn't know what was going on either. Tell us about your misdiagnosis journey.
Yeah, so I was carried down the mountain by those two amazing men who piggybacked me and ran with me for 2 days. And by the time I got to a hospital in Nairobi, I was really in bad shape. But the orthopedist did the films, did the MRI, did the x-rays, and came back and said, you're going to be fine. This is really strained your back, but what you need is bed rest. I'm going to check you into the hospital here in Nairobi. And I stayed for a week and rested, which was a huge relief for my body. But 3 weeks later, I wasn't any better. I went to London, which was the nearest city that I could stand getting to and tolerate. And a friend of my father's took a look at my films and said, you're going to be fine. We're going to do some physical therapy, and that's going to take care of what's bothering you. And I gave it my best, and it didn't work. And finally, I said to my husband, I just have to go home. I got to go back. At the time, we were living in San Francisco. And I went and was hospitalized for the pain. And I remember when my hometown doc walked into the room with films in his hand in a hospital I knew in my home city and said, I have great news. You're going to be fine. And I thought to myself, I feel like my suffering is just being discounted somehow. I just didn't understand what was happening. And I knew in my heart of hearts that something was really wrong with my body. I could barely walk. My husband's on one side of the hospital bed, a commode's on the other because I can't make it to the hospital bathroom at the end of the room. And something really snapped. You start to lose trust in yourself, and you start to wonder if it's all in your head. And I think that lack of trust, that loss of trust, can be as difficult as the pain is. Just not knowing if what you're feeling is real. And the medical system, which I trusted growing up, I trusted all my life, was somehow failing me.
So at what point did you start to acknowledge or realize that it wasn't in your head? It was the doctors who were wrong.
Well, I finally went to a doctor who specialized in pain management, and figuring that if they couldn't find a diagnosis that they could address, at least somebody could help me with the pain. And that doc ended up doing some tests that discovered I had fractures in 2 vertebrae and a smashed disc that weren't showing up in the classic MRI X-ray scenarios. And I underwent a fusion to bolt my spine back together and give me a replacement disc and, hold my back together with titanium until the bone could regrow. So that was the surgery that, quote, fixed what was structurally wrong. But the challenge was, by the time that happened, I was already dreadfully dependent on OxyContin.
All right. So tell us about that journey. When did you realize you were dependent on it, and how did you break that cycle?
Well, it took 15 years. I sadly started to take opioids right when I got off the mountain in Tanzania. A really well-known climber who was filming an IMAX movie on Kilimanjaro bumped into my husband and gave us some Vicodin so that I could make it on the airplane to get to Kenya. And by the time I was operated on 6 months later, I was really dependent. And I think you don't think you're dependent. I think you need the relief. You need the fuzzy edges of the pain to go away. You need to have that neurological release. But the hard thing is, at first you're taking the drugs to feel better, and then you're taking them so you don't feel worse. And that's a pretty tough moment. And what I remember, I was probably 5 or 6 years into my chronic pain journey. And at that time, the pain was so severe that I was unable to sit. I lived my life lying down, either in bed or on a couch in the living room where the cushions had been replaced with foam stacked 4 high because I just couldn't tolerate any pressure on my spine. I was very sensitized to pain. And my best friend came over, and all I could think about that entire visit, instead of just reveling in the fact that this person kept showing up for me, all I thought about was my next fentanyl patch. And all I wanted was to think of a way to get her to put that patch on me so that I could get another hit of fentanyl that my body was craving, that it desperately needed. And to be fair, I was never a drug seeker, but I knew by the minute when that next dose was coming. And, when I asked her for the fentanyl, I just looked up and saw tears in her eyes, because I think we both knew in that moment that my dependence was something that was going in a really scary direction.
So how did this chronic pain on top of this new addiction impact your relationships?
Oh, that's such a good question. For one, pain completely changes your marriage. It creates a totally different, love language. I mean, my husband and I had been married for 16 years when we went up Kilimanjaro. And while we were independent, we had a wonderful relationship. We traveled a lot together. We were both in the same industry. We shared a lot. We had the same values. Suddenly, he's my caregiver. And I am 100% dependent on him for everything, for every physical need, for showering me, for helping me put on clothes. It's almost the relationship you would expect between a parent and a very young child. And it's devastating, not just for me, but devastating for my husband, because I think being a husband was a role that he cherished. And suddenly that was gone. I mean, there was nothing about me that was a wife. I didn't listen. I couldn't laugh. I didn't talk to him about his day. I just wasn't there. Number one, I was fogged out by the drugs, but the pain is so severe that you're really turning inward. And I'm sure any listeners of yours that are out there that have pain understand that feeling of isolation. So my marriage completely shifted for that entire period that I was sick. And equally painful were the loss of friendships. My friends, one by one, when my illness was so sustained with no clear path out, they disappeared. And you have to forgive them for that, because I think it's frightening. They're looking at their own mortality. They're afraid to see their friends so ill and decrepit. And there really were, of my entire community, just 3 people that showed up. And I guess I realized that the ones that really, really, really matter stick. And the ones that don't drift away, but they may come back, as many of them did as I eventually got better. But chronic pain is a very isolating, lonely existence for anybody who's experiencing it. And those relationships are so pivotal, but they're so hard to sustain, because even the energy of a healthy person would be enough to send me spiraling, which sounds so odd because you think it would be rejuvenating, but you just can't handle the energy.
It's really interesting. I'm curious why you call it an illness rather than an injury.
I think it started as an injury, but after the injury was addressed, and it was every bit as bad, if not worse, I think that for me, pain was a disease in and of itself. And I don't think at the time that I was going through this, the medical industry or the medical system recognized pain as a disease in and of itself. In fact, I think it was 2011 when they first noted in scholarly journals that pain was a disease that needed to be addressed, whether or not it had underlying pathology.
So how's your marriage now?
My marriage is great. You know, my husband is one of those guys that does what's right, and he took his vows seriously a long time ago, and he didn't leave. And I think a lot of guys would have said, I really love you, but, you know, when we got married, I didn't sign up for this. Or I didn't expect this when you were 41. I maybe expected it when you were 95. And it's interesting, my parents, before they both passed away, wrote him into their will independently as a beneficiary, as a gesture and way to thank him for sticking by me, which was a beautiful act of grace. But I have to say that it changes your marriage. It changes a lot of the spark and spontaneity that you had when you were younger. And we're all the people we are because of our lived experience. And it shifts things. I think he'll always have an instinct to protect and to care beyond what equal partners would do for each other.
That's impressive. So what is his name?
His name is Chris. Same last name.
Chris, I'm going to address you directly here for a second. Thank you for sticking by your wife. You're an inspiration. It sounds like you've got a story that should be told also. You've got at least one book about how to be a caregiver, how to be a faithful husband. So if you ever want to come on the show and talk about that, I would be very open to.
Thank you. That's lovely. I can't tell you how many times I've asked him to write that book with me.
Well, it should be written because it needs to be read. All right. So how did you keep your illness separate from your own moral worth? Were you able to do that?
I think I got very lost for a long time. And I'll tell you what the turning point was for me. About 7 years into the journey, I really was unable to progress in any way. I mean, clearly recovery is not linear. And I was definitely dependent on the fentanyl. And so I went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and they had at the time a pain rehab and drug detox program. It was a 3-week program. And the curious thing about it was it had many of the same characteristics that I used to have about pushing really hard and forcing you to do things that your body isn't ready to do. And in the first week, they rip off all the drugs, and the withdrawal is crippling. And in the second and third week, they force back physical function. So I went there lying on the floor, and I left there forcing myself to sit, forcing myself to walk, forcing myself to do activities of daily living. And I felt kind of victorious. I mean, I remember calling my doc and saying, this program is so great. I can sit some, I can walk. I'm starting to clean the house. And he was very reserved. And he said, I'm happy for you, and I'll see you when you get back. And I thought, he's so metered. What is wrong with him? I am like euphoric. But 2 days later, I got home and I crashed so badly that I was immediately hospitalized and put on more opioids than ever before. My body could not handle that forcing function that fast. And it just completely collapsed. And I remember one of the doctors coming into my room and saying, the tests just aren't showing anything. And we're going to help you try to manage the pain, but we're going to discharge you today. And I had several thoughts. I thought, number one, the medical system just doesn't have anything else for me. They have played every play in their playbook and they're out. So I'm on my own. I'm never going to get the life back that I used to have. I got to let that go. And somehow I'm responsible for finding a different way to live and a different way forward that respects what my body can do, which wasn't a lot, but my mind was functioning. It was my body that was really limited.
Okay, I do want to go into that next part of your adaptation. But before we go there, I want to help the listeners understand what this might be like as someone who also deals with chronic back pain. The thing about it is, unlike, let's say, leg injuries or arm injuries or shoulder injuries, if you have a leg injury, you can lie down and it'll help you feel better. When you've got a back injury, there's no position you can go into that doesn't hurt. If you stand, it hurts. If you sit, it hurts. If you lie down, it hurts. So it's a challenge, I'll say. So glad you made it through that part. And then you moved on to graduate school by lying on an army cot. So what did that require emotionally from you?
Well, I applied to graduate school because I just knew that I had to somehow re-enter the world. I had been shut inside my bedroom for 10 years at that point, and nothing was changing. So I was so isolated and so lonely and still able to use my mind, but my body wasn't behaving. And the army cot and grad school were my way of, number one, continuing to learn. Number two, recognizing what my body was capable of, which was lying down relatively comfortably. And the army cot was such a great solution because I could put it in a little shopping cart and drag it into that seminar room and set it up in about a minute because it was portable, and blow up an air mattress, and I was set. But I was mortified. I mean, that is not a typical way to be in the world. And I don't think society is yet, hopefully one day will be, prepared for people who are not able-bodied and for people who require being horizontal. And I remember the first day of orientation, and I was lying on the cot on the side of this room with big round tables, and all of my cohort of students, who were half my age, by the way, they were in their 20s and I was 50. We were all together and introducing ourselves at orientation. And when it was my turn, I remember trying to prop myself up on my elbow, so my head would be a little bit higher. And I was so nervous. And my husband and I had talked about, like, what would I say to these kids, And he said, I'm Nancy. I had an injury on Mount Kilimanjaro that really damaged my spine. I'm going to be like this in class, like you see me here lying down. And I just need you to know that I'm good with it so you can be too. And I guess it was my way of trying to find a way in by making them comfortable with what I was. And I thought, will I always be defined as this person with a disability? And as the year went by, I really thought of myself that way, but with a good mind, but with this physical limitation. And I was in a peace and conflict class one day, and I remember my prof saying, we were talking about the identity of refugees in the Sahel in Africa. And he asked us to take a moment and think about our own identities and write down who we were and who we weren't. And everybody is kind of muttering and starting to write things down. And it was so clear to me. I used to be a CEO. I used to be an athlete. I used to be a wife. Now I'm a person who has this disability. I'm unable to sit and move through the world in regular ways, and the world isn't prepared for me, which was obviously how I still thought about myself. And when the professor asked for people to share, I raised my hand and I read this. And no sooner, I really didn't even get through it, but my classmates started to interrupt me. And they said, we do not see you that way at all. You have something to contribute. You give us a lot. You just happen to do a line down. And I thought, oh, thank God. I don't have to define myself this way. I am so much more than what I am physically and what I'm capable of. That was like a real aha moment. I mean, the whole year was a breakthrough in getting back in the world, but that was a moment that showed me that we are all so much more than any limitation we may have, be it, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, you name it. But that was pretty powerful.
Okay. So what was it like when you started traveling again?
Well, I still couldn't sit for more than just, let's say, takeoff and landing. And I would buy 3 seats on an airplane in coach. And I had an air mattress and I would stretch it out and lie across them. And this too was a little unusual. And I remember a lot of business people trying to capture one of those aisle seats to do their work, and me having to just let them know what's going on and why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is always tough, but I got better at it. And it let me go back to work. And that was really a fantastic re-entry of its own. And the curious thing is, as I started doing those things in the world, just the act of, getting to the airport or sitting during takeoff or setting up my cot in that graduate school seminar room, slowly my body, which was so desperately deconditioned from all those years of horizontal living, got a little bit stronger. And I was able to do more. And the crazy thing is, as I started to do a little bit more, the pain started to recede. And I do think that deconditioning and pain, unfortunately, go hand in hand. And our tendency as people experiencing pain is to freeze when we should be moving. And at the time, maybe that sounds obvious to all of us now, but at the time, I don't think doctors and physical therapists, I don't think anybody really understood how important keeping moving is for your body. It's, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I just lost all my muscle tone. I was just kind of a bag of bones and no strength, which had a pain of its own.
So how did returning to work change your mental state of being?
I really didn't have a sense of purpose at all during those years. I was surviving, trying to exist, trying to make sense of what was going on with my body. And even going back to grad school just gave me a sense of direction. I was very interested in, it was an international studies degree. I was very interested in humanitarian work and international development, and very passionate about helping lift up women and girls. My Silicon Valley business had been a company for girls to get their hands on computers so they would grow up and be competitive with boys who were playing video games at the time. So I always had that inkling that I wanted to do something. But of course, the issues that women and girls experience in the remote parts of the world are so different from what girls in the United States and California are experiencing trying to use a computer. And it made me realize that there are many ways that we get marginalized in this world, and gender is just one of them, and physical disability is another, and there are so many. But it made me understand just an inkling of what that might feel like, and it made me want to focus my energies and my time on helping people who are marginalized to have a better life.
Okay, that's great. So at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about resilience. So how has your definition of resilience changed from what it was?
Well, resilience is not about pushing through. Resilience is in part about acceptance of whatever your new normal is and adapting your life, your energy, your brain around what your body or your mind can do in order to find a different way forward.
Okay, so let's talk about your book for the next couple of questions. So why did you decide to write your book, Perilous Ascent, Perilous Ascent, and why did you name it that?
I felt like it was important to write this for a few reasons. For one, I felt like a lot of stories about chronic pain or about illness were stories of triumph that really didn't show the deep vulnerability and mess of what can happen to a life that is dismantled by chronic pain. I also wrote it because I was trying to make sense of my own journey. In so many ways, I think when we're in it, it's hard to understand what the purpose of it is, or if there was a better self that's going to come out of that at the other end. But the most important reason I wrote it is that I somehow navigated my way through. And I felt like if I could tell this story and somebody could feel seen or recognize themselves in some of those pages and maybe do something differently than I did or try something that worked for me, if I could help people out there, then that was worth writing the book. And the reason I named it Perilous Ascent was that it had a double meaning for me. Of course, it was about the mountain, but the mountain is just the opening of the very beginning of the story. And it was really about being at the lowest of low and how treacherous it is to find your way back up to ground level. So it was that ascent back to health that resonated with me. And that was why I named the book Perilous Ascent.
Okay. Was the process of writing this book healing in any way for you?
Absolutely. I think, is it painful? Yes, because you're excavating a lot of memory that for many people that go through a trauma has been deeply buried. I think we as humans get pretty good at shoving things down when they're really hard to deal with. And that process was difficult, but so healing because you learn things about yourself that were unknown to you at the time. And I think you can, all of us who are writers, and you know this from your own writing and your own books, you can look back, whether you're writing a novel or whether you're writing a memoir, and recognize something about a character that you might not have known early on that only comes with the wisdom of distance and time. And I think I learned a lot through the process. And yes, I think it's cathartic. Though my husband, Chris, would say, I wish you hadn't written that book, because as a person who likes to look forward and not back, that's him. And in many cases, he was my memory for a lot of times that were foggy and drug-addled and hard to remember. It meant going back and really trying to resurrect what did that feel like. And I think we survived it, thank goodness, and we don't want to go back there.
All right, so that gives me two questions immediately.
Sure.
What was he afraid of something by looking backwards? And by writing this book, is this a way of helping people go forward?
I don't know if Chris actually was afraid of something. I think, well, maybe he was afraid of going back to how horrible that felt. I mean, his life was turned upside down too. And, he had to keep us in our house and work really hard and take care of me and pay all the bills and keep it all together. And I think emotionally show nothing but steadiness to me because I was in such a tailspin. And I think going back there is going back into that pain. So I think he probably did fear it. But in terms of finding a way forward, I think because the book does go through the full arc, the narrative includes getting off the drugs finally and going back to grad school. It does show a way forward, and it shows people that when they hit rock bottom, there still can be a path. So part of that is about mindset, I think.
Okay, and as a final question today, can you tell the listeners how, from what I understand, your book hasn't been released yet, but how they can pre-order or how they can keep track on when this book is released and how they can get a copy of it?
Yeah, the best thing to do right now, I have a Substack called Life Inside Pain, and I write twice a month with excerpts from the book, so people can follow along with the story, not as richly as they could if it were in full memoir form, but it's really a forum for people that live with pain or illness or a disruption in their life who can't use what they used to use to get through it and need to find different ways of being. So that would be the best way. That would be at Nancy Deyo, my last name, Deyo.substack.com. And I would really welcome that until the book's out in the world.
Perfect. I'll make sure I include the link in the show notes.
Thanks. That would be really wonderful.
Yeah. So Nancy, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate this conversation.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I hope it will resonate with some of your listeners out there.
I'm sure it will, because it definitely has with me. So my guest today has been Nancy Deyo, and she is the author of the forthcoming memoir, Perilous Ascent. And she offers listeners a candid, deeply relevant exploration of how to recognize personal limits, navigate medical uncertainty, and reconstruct identity after a collapse. Again, the links will be in the show notes. Be sure to follow Stories from Real Life wherever you listen to podcasts. And that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.
Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.